3, 2, 1. Okay, so we've talked about what life is. Now, we just need to understand a little bit about what science is. What is science? Science, the word science comes to us from a Latin word meaning knowledge. And science is a way of discovering things about the natural world. Um, and the scientific method, which is at the heart of science, consists of making observations, objective observations, and testing hypotheses. So you can see in this diagram, what is represented is the scientific method. Now, observations about natural phenomena give rise to hypotheses or educated guesses about what the cause of the phenomenon is or what the result of the phenomenon in the long term might be. So a hypothesis leads to an idea for an experiment. The results of that experiment give data, and based on the results of the data, we come up with certain conclusions about whether the hypothesis was shown to be correct or close to correct or maybe not correct at all. We can modify the hypothesis and perform more experiments, collect more data, and so on and so forth. And that is, in essence, what the scientific method is all about. But really, it's important to always remember that not all science is able to be subjected to experiment. If we look at things that occur in very long term, like for example over millions of years, we can't perform an experiment that's going to replicate what's happening over millions of years. So we have to design experiments in a clever way that we have to make observations in clever, objective ways that enable us to then make hypotheses that can test what may have caused the observations that we see. So what is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is a proposition based on observations. And a good hypothesis should be testable by experimentation. Another thing about a good hypothesis is that it should be simple. A very complicated explanation may be correct, but it's difficult to show through experimentation. So we often say that a hypothesis should be parsimonious, or parsimony means like greedy, or it should be as simple as possible. It should be as reduced as possible. It should not be extravagant, because extravagant explanations are very difficult to demonstrate as being correct or incorrect. So, for example, say you've got a flashlight and it's been sitting in a drawer for a long time and it doesn't work. Okay, so you probably have an intuitive sense of what's wrong with it. So what do? You form a hypothesis that, hey, maybe something is wrong with the batteries. The batteries have lost their charge. And this is a very easy hypothesis to test. It's very simple. All you have to do is take the batteries out of the flashlight, replace them, and see what happens. So you do that. Let's see what happens. Nothing. Still not working. So that hypothesis about the flashlight batteries having lost their charge, you can determine to be false. It's not the problem with the batteries. So you can come up with another hypothesis, an alternative hypothesis. That maybe something is wrong with the bulb. Maybe the bulb has burnt out. So how do we test this hypothesis? Take the old bulb out, put a new bulb in, let's see what happens. Now the flashlight is working. So we've discovered, or figured out, that the cause of the flashlight not working was the bulb and not the batteries. Yay. Okay, so that's a hypothesis. Now, let's not confuse that with a scientific theory. Now, you may have heard the expression that such and such is just a theory. It's only a theory. Um, and in scientific context, we don't say that. We don't accept that because a scientific theory is a very broad framework that explains a number of natural phenomena. In science, we say a theory can generate many, many specific and testable hypotheses. A theory isn't just a guess, but it is supported by a lot of observational and experimental evidence. It has a practical application. And here's one of the most important things: a scientific theory will continue to accept modification as new experimental evidence comes in. So, one reason that we don't say that something like, for example, evolution by means of natural selection is a natural law is because we don't have complete understanding of evolution. We continue to find new evidence that modifies very slightly the basic premises of evolution by means of natural selection. We don't say that there's nothing more for us to learn. And that's a very important distinction. But it's very important to understand that in science, a theory is not just a wild guess. So saying something that is just a theory is really not a valid argument to dismiss something as broad as evolution or atoms or a number of different scientific theories. As you can see here, all of science is based on different theories. So in biology, evolutionary theory is at the heart of understanding all aspects of what occurs in biology. In chemistry, atomic theory. Yes, atoms are theoretical particles. We don't just look at them on a regular basis because they are so small, and our understanding of how atoms work is constantly changing. That's what chemists spend their careers doing, is trying to understand more and more about atoms, if in fact they exist, which it's pretty clear that they do because it explains how chemical reactions occur. Plate tectonic theory is the central theory now in geology. It explains a lot of geological phenomena: why we observe earthquakes where we do, why we see volcanoes where we do, why land masses appear the way that they do, why the Himalayan mountains are present, other mountain ranges, and so on and so forth. So a lot of explanatory power. Big Bang Theory explains of what astronomers observe through the Hubble telescope and through other telescopes, what we see in the night sky. Cell theory is another important part of biology, which we'll get into later in this semester. The germ theory, explaining how and why diseases may occur. And also in physics, the theory of gravity, as discovered by Sir Isaac Newton, and the theories of relativity, the general and special theories of relativity, as put forward by Albert Einstein. These are all theories in the sense that they have broad explanatory power, but they continue to be modifiable in the light of new experimental evidence. Where does science come from? Science and application of the scientific method, experimental data are collected through especially universities, including Auburn. Auburn is a major research university. While you are here to get your degree, there's a lot of other things that are going on here, including experimental research in biological sciences, animal science, veterinary science, chemistry, physics, mathematics, statistics, and on and on. A lot of government agencies also are doing science, like the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, that is, Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, a lot of others. Also in industry, there are a lot of companies that will perform experiments to further their the business model of whatever company that is. Like, for example, Genentech. A lot of private institutions, like hospitals, are also performing research. Like at the Mayo Clinic, if you are very sick, and you can go to the Mayo Clinic and seek treatment. And a lot of the treatments that they are doing there may be in some way experimental, but they are capable of prolonging life and preserving quality of life. But for all of these types of different institutions and others, science works best when it is shared. So how do scientists share their research? They do it through publications. So if you go to the library here at Auburn, you'll find that there are a number of scientific publications, just many, many, many publications in different specialties within science. Publications are useful because they subject scientific experiments to peer review. So if you were to perform an experiment and you wanted to share that, you would have to send it into a publication where they would send your manuscript or your paper that you wrote off to other researchers anonymously. They would look at your experiment and say, you know, this looks good or this does not, and they would determine whether or not your experiment is sound and whether that publication wants to, in fact, publish your article. And original research publications can be very specialized. So in our own library, we've got the American Fern Journal, dedicated just to the biology of ferns. Physical Oceanography, an entire journal based just on the shape of and the activity of oceans. Mycologia is one of my favorite journals because it deals with fungi, which is what my area of specialty is. The North American Journal of Fisheries Management is another very highly specialized research publication. Or the Journal of Molluscan Studies. You can just look at mollusks, a journal that's all about oysters and snails and squids and those kinds of animals. So original research publication can be very highly specialized. Peer-reviewed publications tend to be very rich in technical jargon and very difficult for non-professionals to understand. The journal that's just simply called Science has articles that are geared towards very broadly scientists in the broad sense. So if you were a biologist or a chemist or a physicist, you should be able to understand a little bit more of what's going on in the articles that they publish. But if I were to try and just pick up a physics journal or a mathematics journal, I would very quickly get lost. It's very difficult for me to understand that because that technical jargon is not what I've trained in. So how does a layperson access science? How does a person who's not a scientist learn about science? Well, there's a number of ways you can do that. One is simply by taking a class like you are taking right now. And using your textbook, which has a lot of information in there. All of that information in that textbook at one point is derived from observations and experiments by trained professional scientists. There are also some lay publications out there where they take original research articles and reinterpret them using less jargon. I don't want to say they're dumbing them down or watering them down, but they are taking a lot of the technical jargon out in order to make it more understandable for the general public or the scientifically curious public. In this day and age, we get a lot of our information from things like blogs and other web publications. With regard to those, YRMV means your results may vary. So you might go to a blog like IFL Science, which is short for I Love Science. And there's a lot of variability in how science is presented. Often on these blogs, they're trying to sensationalize things, and they're clickbait. They want you to read the article, but if you don't have a discerning mind and you don't learn to think critically, um, you may be led to believe some things that aren't very well substantiated. And these types of sources are far removed from the original research, which came through research published in peer-reviewed publications. So, how does science affect our lives on a daily basis? And it's almost impossible to think of the number of ways that science has affected our standard of living, our quality of life, our ability to do things like travel the world, to communicate with each other, to see into the ancient past, and to try and get a glimpse of what the future may hold for us. Um, that's all. Those are all things that the scientific method has, in one way or another, provided to us. But three specific ways in that science may affect your life on a daily basis, specifically within biology, things like emergent diseases, understanding, for example, where do these new diseases come from? Where are they going? How are they transmitted? What kind of therapies may be available for them? Something like the Zika virus, which has gained a foothold in Florida and may affect uh, the unborn children of pregnant women who live in areas where these mosquitoes that transmit the virus are found. Biodiversity and habitat loss. As I said in the video on what biology is, there are a lot of different types of organisms out there. On the order of 30 million different species are estimated to live on our planet, and understanding where they live and where they may be imperiled by habitat loss is something that affects them especially, but may also have an effect on us, because we rely upon the other species of life on Earth for a lot of our commodities. Everything that we eat as a food item, because we are animals, was once some other living thing. It might have been another animal, it might have been a plant, it might be products derived from those plants and animals, like eggs and flour and things like that. But those resources, once a species goes extinct, we cannot exploit it anymore. And there's a lot of reasons to value biodiversity above and beyond just what those organisms that we are capable of exploiting in the near term. Climate change is something that is accepted by scientists, but not by everyone in the general public. 97% of scientists accept that climate change is occurring and that there is a human component to the causes of climate change. This is something that we can observe. Maybe we can't experimentally affect the climate on a global scale, but we can do a lot of experiments that demonstrate why we are observing what we are observing in terms of a global change to our atmosphere and to the climate, and understanding what that's going to mean for the future of our species. This is something that's going to affect our lives more and more as the climate change conundrum unfolds. Okay, so that's a brief introduction to what is biology, what is life, what is science. From here, we're going to delve into the very smallest scale of living organisms, which are atoms and molecules. So we're going to do a little bit of chemistry that's going to inform us about how bigger scales of things happen, like in cells. So hopefully we'll get a good understanding of that, because atoms are something that comprise everything. Every living organism is made up of atoms, and a lot of what we're looking at this semester are things that are universal to all living things. So that's kind of what the spirit of Introduction to Biology is looking at those aspects of biology that are really the commonalities and in all living things that exhibit those 7 qualities that I described in the previous video. Okay, so next up, atoms.